Welcome to the Rod Zimmerman Podcast. I'm Rod Zimmerman, and this is my podcast. Today's special guest needs no introduction, but it's my podcast, so I'm going to introduce him. Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, member of the Yardbirds, The Firm, founding member of Led Zeppelin, guitarist, inventor, creator, engineer, producer, Jimmy Page. First of all, thank you so much for being a part of my podcast. And I wanted to start out with the first true Led Zeppelin box set. How did the Led Zeppelin 4-CD set come about?
Yeah, actually what happened was that Atlantic put out the CDs. And in the past I'd always been in charge of, mastering the records. And there were a lot of, some of the CDs didn't sound at all up to scratch to me, they just didn't sound right. And this gave a really good opportunity to get it right. Get the sound right on them, improve them, by going back to the original studio master tapes, that sort of pre-production tapes, wherever possible, that is. And then, because by nature of the fact that it was a 4-CD package, to represent them in a different form, so it became like the old picture with the new frame, and it's really interesting actually, because it sheds new light on everything. I think
Where did you find all the old Led Zeppelin tapes?
They were all over the place. Really, it was a treasure trove trying to find them all, but fortunately we were reasonably successful with that. I had some in my own possession, but then other ones that were supposed to be in like security archives, some of those were there, and then you find some somewhere else. But the ones that I handled personally were where they ought to be, so that was fortunate.
What was the most difficult part of the project?
I guess the hardest part was getting the running order to go across the 4 CDs, and taking tracks from all of the 9 albums that would be, wouldn't it really? And interlacing them and make getting them to all feel comfortable and being comfortable with them myself.
What's the difference between these versions and the originals?
Well, the clarity obviously is is enhanced. That's the major point of it. But I think the key to it is the new running order as well. That's the thing that we really, I think people find most exciting about it, I hope. It just sheds new light on it, and that's I think that's going to be the interesting thing in retrospect, to see what people's reaction is to it. I think it'll be pretty positive.
Did you find any old unreleased numbers left over?
We didn't have any sort of golden nuggets left, so to speak. Everything that was left over since Into the Outdoor, and after we'd lost John, that was completed, in other words, with vocals, etc., and maybe they needed a remix or whatever, but they came out on Coda, and that was in light of the fact that there have been so many bootlegs out, countless more now, as we all know, but at that time, so many bootlegs out of live performances, and we thought, well, it would be, good idea just to put those things out then. So in fact they went out on Coda as opposed to coming out on this. So in fact there wasn't any studio material left. So as these things had sort of surfaced and been played apparently on radio stations over there, we thought we'd include them. We had Travelling Riverside Blues, which had been recorded for the BBC many years back, 69, 70, and it actually sort of surfaced. It surfaced during the last tour that I did. As I was doing sort of radio interviews, people were saying, and what about this? And they'd play it, and they'd say, was it an outtake from the second album? There's a big theory that that's what it was. So, as it was around, there was a lot of interest. We thought we'd put that on. And then, of course, there's the White Summer, which again was done on a live broadcast with, we did a whole set at that point, but we just included that one.
Do any of the re-EQ'd songs stand out?
I think they all benefit from the new EQing, actually. It just makes them crisper, and there's more space to them. I mean, there's numbers on there, for instance, Achilles' Last Stand, which sounds absolutely fantastic. It sounds phenomenal, and that's a number that I think that was sort of missed by a lot of people, really, because Presence wasn't necessarily very wide-selling or whatever album. It wasn't sort of. It was pretty well received by people that I've spoken to. But it didn't sort of sell in the volume of, for instance, previous albums. And that sounds really great.
Is it true that Elvis Presley's Baby Let's Play House got you into rock and roll?
I was really seduced by rock and roll at an early age, that's for sure. But that was a record where I listened to it and I thought, wait a minute, there's just an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, a bass and a voice, and it just sounds, just sounded so dynamic that, that's the point when I started to try and get this instrument that I had at home into some sort of shape. We had a guitar laying around the house. It had been given to us by somebody, and I don't even know who it was who gave it to the family. It's been sitting around for years. And of course there wasn't anybody who could really sort of play in those days. I just fortunately had to find someone at school who knew a few chords, and once I got the thing in tune and learnt a few chords, and I went on from there.
What was your idea when you put Led Zeppelin together?
I had it in my mind exactly what I wanted to try and get together, and then it was just a matter of searching around for the right personnel that could pull it off. By that I mean, for the sort of work that I'd managed to expand around the Yardbirds material, because there was a lot of areas in there for improvisation, and I'd come up with a lot of riffs of my own and ideas and passages and movements and things. That, along with the incorporation of the acoustic work, this was the idea of it, along with the blues, etc. So my first choice is either Steve Marriott or Terry Reid. Steve Marriott was already involved in something. Terry Reid, who actually was my first sort of choice, actually put me on to Robert, and Robert had been playing up in the Midlands, and I don't think he played down in the South, so consequently I hadn't heard of him. And once I heard him sing, I was pretty impressed, to say the least, and I invited him to come down to my house and spend some time down there, and we'd discuss exactly what the plan was, and see how he could get along with it. And he was reasonably mutable, so it worked. And he although I had in mind a very powerful drummer, I wasn't ready for John Bonham. I must say he was beyond the realms of anything that I could possibly have imagined. It's absolutely phenomenal, and still is. I mean, his work's just incredible, isn't it? And actually, it was during this point of me going around and seeing Robert that Jonesy called me up and said, "I hear you putting a band together." There's all this nonsense about ads in the Melody Maker is absolute rubbish. He actually called me up and said, "I hear you getting a band together, and I'd like to be part of it if you consider me." So I said, "All right, well, we'll all get together." And we got together and had a rehearsal, and we didn't look back from there.
How long did Led Zeppelin 1 take to record?
The first album took about 36 hours or something like that. In actual hours. Obviously it wasn't, go in the studio and work for 36 hours. It was over a period. But when it was all added up, it was that amount of time. I mean, I knew by the studio bill. But we had actually played these numbers live, because there were a few dates to fulfil from the Yardbirds. And we went over and fulfilled those, and went in and recorded, and then of course we changed the name.
What was your first US tour like?
We went over to the States to support Vanilla Fudge on a tour, and that's when things started happening over there. Well, actually, it was great receptions to what we were doing there, because obviously I've been in the Yardbirds, and I guess people were really curious to see what was going to be coming, and it's well received. But it was when we actually went to San Francisco that it really took off, because we were supporting Country Joe and the Fish, and I think Taj Mahal was on as well, and I mean, it was just like dynamite.
As a producer, what studio techniques did you come up with?
Backwards echo was one that I invented at the time. I know the engineer said it couldn't be done. Well, I knew it could be done because I'd actually suggested it before on the Yardbirds track. And I said, why don't you try this idea? And it was backwards echo, reversing the tape, recording the echo, and then putting it round on the right way again so that the echo would precede the signal. And the engineer, Glyn Johns, at the time, for the first album, he's the engineer for the first album, he said, "This is impossible, won't work, it's impossible." I said, "Will you do what I'm telling you to do? Just do it." And of course, when we put the tape round the right way again and played it back, he was grudgingly moving the fader up, and you could hear this fantastic sound. It was only really employed on that album, on the end of You Shook Me.
Jimmy, what's the most satisfying thing about Led Zeppelin to you?
The most satisfying, it's the most rewarding part of it, as for me talking about it and how it's a fact of having, been part of music like that, which has stood up to the test of time. I think every musician hopes that their music will hold up, and let alone having been part of a fabulous band as well, into the bargain, it's wonderful.
And on that note, all I can say is thank you, Jimmy Page. You've been listening to the Rod Zimmerman Podcast. Tune in for the next episode where we'll be talking with interesting people. Until then, keep on keeping on. The Rod Zimmerman Podcast is a Z-Man production.